On today's show, some observations from the Hawks-Heat game on Wednesday, the road opener in the preseason for the Hawks, and of course, the rescheduled game from last week. Plan to get into there, and at the end of the podcast, some ESPN NBA rankings that honestly did kind of trigger me on Wednesday. So we'll get into all of that and more, and it's coming up right now.
You are Locked On Hawks, your daily Atlanta Hawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 1822 of the Locked On Hawks podcast. I am your host, Brad Rowland, coming to you on a Wednesday evening into Thursday. And today's podcast is brought to you by the folks at the FanDuel Sportsbook. You can begin the season now with a big return at FanDuel. Put your first $5 bet. You can start with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. I also want to encourage you at the top of the show, as I always do, to make us your first listen each and every day here at Locked On Hawks. Check us out anywhere you get your podcasts, from Apple to Spotify to YouTube. Please like the video as you are watching it on YouTube and subscribe and tell your friends about the show. So I'll begin this podcast by saying kind of a little bit of behind the curtain stuff at the top of the show. So I'm recording this particular segment or mini segment before the game on Wednesday. You'll hear why in a second. I am traveling later on today. So I've been doing podcasts. I've actually done like 6 shows in the last 4 days. I've been very busy on this feed, but I have a day job thing. The Hawks were not supposed to be playing on Wednesday, so it was kind of scheduled around that on some level. And all that said, I'll be a little bit lo-fi this evening. So with that said, behind the curtain, I was a little bit triggered by something that happened on Tuesday and Wednesday, and that's ESPN's NBA rankings. So at the end of the show, the last segment of the show, probably the last 10 minutes, 15 minutes of the show, is going to be recorded before I leave on this trip and before the actual game happens. And I'll kind of in between talk about the game after the game happens. It'll either be in a kind of low video quality or maybe audio only, TBD on that until I actually get to where I'm going. But I had a window before I hit the road on Wednesday morning. I got a lot of questions about that. So at the end of the show, again, one more time, I'll be talking about ESPN's NBA rank. In between, though, as we'll dive into right now, you'll be hearing my reactions from after the game on Wednesday between the Hawks and the Heat. So here we go with that. And stay tuned at the end of the podcast for some NBA rankings talk about the folks at ESPN. All right, we'll dive in now to the Hawks and Heat from Wednesday evening. As I kind of foreshadowed a little bit earlier in previous episodes, the Hawks sat a bunch of guys in this game on a first night of a back-to-back. The Hawks now go to Oklahoma City on Thursday in a pretty treacherous back-to-back that was, of course, unscheduled. But in this one, they ended up sitting Shai, Bogdanovic, and Hunter. Plus, they did not have a Kongwu still out of the lineup with a toe issue. Don Barlow still out of the lineup with a back contusion. Seth Lunny's banged up as well. So they actually were down to 13 guys the Hawks were in this game. That included Keaton Wallace and Daquan Plowden and Kevon Harris. So it was a pretty short roster for a preseason game. People kind of asked a lot about this. What I would say is it's fairly normal for a team to rest guys, not play guys a ton of minutes in the preseason. I think the first 2 games they actually played their guys a pretty normal amount. They only sat one person, and it was Bogey in the first game, and then Hunter in the second half of the second game, basically. But in an overall sense, I would say because of the back-to-back and the fact that it was unscheduled, Quinn kind of foreshadowed this and just kind of said, look, they're not going to play everybody probably in these 2 games. TBD still on who plays on Thursday, but about half the guys who were available played in this one. Quinn also said preseason is kind of the reality is like they only have 2 healthy centers right now, at least in terms of with Kongwu not playing today, in Nance and Capella. Capella left the game with an ankle issue of some kind. I don't think it's serious from what I understand right now, but TBD on that. And then they actually had to play Mogay and David Roddy at center because Nance is not someone you want to push too far. You don't want to have 2 of your 3 oldest guys on the team playing big minutes necessarily on a back-to-back in the preseason. So it is what it is, but the Hawks were obviously shorthanded in this game. With that said, the first half was still a fairly normal rotation. So we'll spend more time on that in a second. I thought early on, the movement of the ball in particular was pretty good in this game, especially in the first half. It helped that they made shots pretty much the entire first half, but the ball was zinging around for the most part. They started to beat Krejci in place of Hunter at 3, next to Trae, Dyson, Jalen, and Capella. That's the third straight game that they've started those 4 guys together, Trae, Dyson, Jalen, Capella. So I'm now getting stronger and stronger. That's probably going to be the starting lineup on opening night with those 4 plus probably Hunter, but we'll see. Veit had a couple of assists pretty quickly. One pass to Capella that was really nice. They won the first 5 minutes by 5 points with the starters. And as soon as the bench kicked in the game, it got kind of loose, I would say, for Atlanta at times. They had some ball security issues. They actually had 10 turnovers in like 7.5 minutes to begin the game. Very preseasonly on the field there. I think 6 of them were live ball as well, which led to transition opportunities. It was kind of sloppy in a way that you might not be shocked by, but still notable once the starters left the game. Rotationally, it was those 5 that started, plus Bufkin, Matthews, Roddy, and Nance as kind of the firm 9-man rotation in the first half of this game. The only guy who was not on a 2-way or on Exhibit 10 that was not like already in the rotation tonight was Mo Gay, and then he ended up coming in more because Capella played 7 minutes and then had the ankle soreness and then was shut down after that. Gay played more after that because he was kind of the only center-sized player. And I'd say some of the weakness and like weirdness about the offense and the passing and the mistakes was because guys were playing together that don't often play together. That's part of it anyway. Trae had a nice lob to Larry Nance for a dunk with like 3 minutes left in the first quarter. He was really good for a stretch there, hit a pretty deep 3 after that. The Hawks actually managed to lose the first quarter despite shooting 7 of 8 from 3. It's kind of hard to do. They were not great inside the arc and had the giveaways as well. A nice run in the second quarter, a 16-6 run by the Hawks to open things up. Jalen and Trae were awesome in that stretch. Jalen had a big dunk to begin that first possession of the second quarter, and then Trae drew a 3-shot foul and then made another 3 right after that. So a nice sequence there. Trae found Dyson for a nice cut for free throws, and then Jalen I thought was really assertive early in the second quarter, using the kind of physicality that I talked about a lot with Glenn on yesterday's show, and what we want to see from him. He was very good in that first half, and again, the third straight game that the Hawks have intentionally kept Trae and Jalen on the court together. We'll see if that actually translates to the season, but they've tried to do that a lot so far. The Hawks were 10 of 11 from 3 to begin this game, which is kind of crazy. I thought Roddy actually had some nice moments as a scorer in the first half. He had 11 points in like 9 minutes against Miami's real rotation, so he uses physicality really well. He's beefy, but definitely skilled in some ways. The Hawks were up by 3 at halftime, despite the interesting, I would say pretty crazy shooting splits in the first half. They shot 68% from 3 in the first half, which was the highest in any half in the entire league during the entire preseason this year, according to Hawks PR. So a pretty crazy run there to be up only by 3. But Jalen had 21 points on 9 shots in the first half, which is crazy. And then Trae had 8 assists in 17 minutes. They were plus 11 in the Trae plus Jalen minutes in the first half, which I think was pretty evident watching the game together. When they played together, the Hawks were quite good. When they didn't, they weren't as good. And that was pretty obvious. They actually had 20 assists at halftime, and it was pretty impressive, I thought. Like, Miami was playing their normal rotation. That's a good defensive team. They're well coached. And the Hawks, while they weren't at full strength, when they played their actual guys that they will be relying on in this game, they actually looked pretty good. Now, in a second, we'll get to the second half of this game, and the third quarter was pretty dire, but I would say as a broad takeaway at the top of this, I'll just say, like, I was encouraged for the most part. The ball movement, the defense was just okay at times, but the guys who matter, like Daniels, for instance, even Johnson, Krejci, did their jobs defensively, and Nance looked fine to me. So, overall, when it actually mattered, it was totally fine, even in what became a loss for the Hawks. In a second, I will dive into the second half of this game, but first, a word from our friends at FanDuel. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, and basketball and football are now both here at the same time. You can begin the season with a big return at FanDuel Sportsbook. FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and now you can find a lot of information from the latest stats to live play-by-play and much more on the same page where you're placing your bets at FanDuel Sportsbook. You also begin with a great offer at FanDuel. That's $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet at FanDuel. You should also know that the FanDuel Sportsbook app is really easy to use as well. They have the entire stuff covered for you across the sports betting space, from over-unders to point spreads. They have money lines and player props, live betting, same-game parlays, future bets, and so much more. The app is safe and is secure at FanDuel Sportsbook, and they cover the entire range of sports as well. That includes the NBA as the headliner of this podcast, plus WNBA, NFL, college football, MLB, hockey, golf, tennis, soccer, auto racing, boxing, MMA, and so much more. And all of that is fantastic. It's all there in one place at FanDuel, and it's a great time to sign up with the folks at FanDuel Sportsbook. One more time here, visit FanDuel.com and get started right now with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. The place to go is FanDuel.com to check out America's #1 sportsbook. All right, and after halftime, the Hawks actually gave up a pretty interesting stretch. So Trae and Jalen sat the second half. no surprise there to me on a back-to-back. We'll see if they play on Thursday, but they were replaced by Kobe and Roddy. And Miami played its normal lineup all the way through the third quarter, basically. They started out pretty well, actually, with Kobe and Dyson. Kobe had a nice finish, and then found Dyson for a three. Kobe had a three-point play through contact against Nikola Jovic. But overall, the shooting regression was quite swift for Atlanta. The Heat starters kind of blew them off the floor in the third quarter for the most part. It was 37-15 in the third. They were down by 21 at the end of the period after being up by as many as 11 in the first half. Offensively, it was kind of predictable how not great they were given the personnel they had available with no Trae and no Jalen, but they shot very poorly. 5-22 from the floor and 2 of 14 from 3 with 6 turnovers in that third quarter. I don't mean to underplay it or tell you it doesn't matter at all, because I'm not saying that, but the Hawks did play the entire quarter without Trae, without Jalen, without Clint, without Risache, without Bogey, without Okongwu, and without Hunter. I would argue that basically that is 7 of their top 8 players. The only guy who I would say is firmly in their top 8 that played in the third quarter is Dyson Daniels. Everybody else didn't play. So it doesn't really matter to me that they lost. And again, Miami was playing their normal guys. So it was bad. Don't get me wrong. But I don't want to overreact to it either. Later in the fourth quarter, it was largely the deep bench guys. In fact, Kevon Harris made his debut to begin the fourth quarter. They also went to Daquan Plowden shortly after that. And then Keaton Wallace played a bunch in the fourth quarter, maybe the entire fourth quarter, actually. They played David Roddy at center in the fourth, which says it all. Again, because they had no Capella for the rest of the game, and Nance was not going to play a ton of minutes, they had to go to either Gay or Roddy in the fourth at center. Roddy actually played 11 team minutes with 33. He was out there a lot. That was kind of funny. Harris looked good, I thought, actually. I think it was a good signing for having him on that camp deal. He actually looked solid to me. Kobe had a nice drive and a three-point play in the final minutes, but basically not a whole lot to add about the stretch run. But, again, overall, they didn't have their pedal to the metal in this game. I know everybody wants to see more of the guys. And look, I would be not opposed to seeing more of the key guys, but the schedule change and the back-to-back just made it to where it was not going to be, from what I understand, practical to play everybody. And again, still a TBD on Thursday. As far as the player-by-player stuff in this game, I'll just go through it now quickly. Of the bench guys, I mentioned Harris. He was actually pretty impressive, 13 points in 10 minutes. I think he is a guy who is like a two-way quality player, like a very solid, fringe NBA player, basically. He's overqualified for the role. He looked good in this game. Plowden was less impressive, but had three rebounds in 10 minutes. Keaton was fine. 3 steals, that's what he's going to do for you, and pass the ball effectively, but not like the most effective offensive initiator off your bench. I thought Moguet struggled, and I think it's been a struggle for Moguet basically the entire way so far in the exhibition schedule. He was 1 of 6 from the floor. Looks a little bit less athletic than he probably needs to be. I don't know if he's still banged up from the back issue or whatever was going on with him in previous months, etc. But he's supposed to be healthy. He just doesn't look great to me, springy-wise. There's always this debate about whether he's a center or not. He's never been a center in the eyes of the Hawks. But if he's not moving so well, he might have to be center. So we'll see. But he didn't look good in this game, I didn't think, unfortunately. I thought Larry Nance was fine. He didn't shoot it as well in this game. He was 2 of 4 on 2s and 0 of 3 on 3s. 4 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, and 2 steals for Larry in 20 minutes. Garrison made 3 threes. That's basically his job in a nutshell. Looked fine to me. Buffkin was up and down, but he was much better in this game than he was on Monday. 15 points, 4 rebounds, 4 assists, had 2 blocks in this game, got to the line 6 times. I think my friend Tyler Jones, who is a regular guest on the show, put it very well, actually, in this game. And that he said on Twitter that essentially when Kobe is trying to play the Trae Young role, he doesn't look very good doing that. And when he's not doing that and leading into his strengths and attacking the rim, because Kobe's supposed to be a guy that has always done this, and I can vouch for this going back to college, when he attacks the rim, that's his best asset in some ways on offense. And when he did that, he was much better in this game. And then defensively, he looks good. So I know it was a little bit of a hiccup on Monday. People kind of panicked about that. I thought he looked just fine today and was reasonably efficient, had the 4 assists, looked fine to me. To the start, David Roddy, 33 minutes, 4 of 9 on 2s and 1 of 6 on 3s. Didn't shoot it well, but actually looked pretty good, I thought. Physicality-wise, like he's still limited and just the lack of length, basically, but he is beefy and physical and skilled for his size. So he's a useful NBA player, but TBD on the rest of his role. To the starters, Capella looked fine until he left the game. 7 minutes, 3 rebounds, and 3 points for Clint. Veet was okay, moved the ball well, had 5 fouls, which is a little bit strange in 22 minutes, but 5 points, 3 assists, 2 rebounds, and 2 6 from the floor. Dyson looked good, to me defensively, especially 9 points, 5 rebounds, but made 3 threes, shot it comfortably. That's the single biggest thing, because I know I've been saying this all summer long. I've been ahead of the game on this. Dyson's defense is elite. That's not a hyperbole for me. I think he actually is elite defensively, but the big thing is, can he and will he shoot? And the answer is, so far, he's definitely willing, and he was 3 of 6 in the game from 3 in this one. Trae looked good to me. 10 points, 7 assists in 17 minutes. I think he had 8 at one point. They actually took one away, but made both of his threes. It wasn't like trying to hunt his shot too much. He said the other night on Monday at home, he's been intent on getting guys involved. He's just kind of ramping up right now. He looked good to me, played fine. And then Jalen Johnson was excellent. Again, only one half of play for Trae and Jalen, but Jalen had 21 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists. He was 4 of 5 on 2s, 4 of 4 on 3s, which is interesting because that's the area of offensively where I'm not entirely sold yet, but he shot the ball well in this game. If you want more on this, I talked about him later on in this podcast, as you're going to hear in a second when it comes to the ESPN player ranking segment, but also yesterday with Glenn in deep dive fashion. But I thought Jalen looking really, really, really good, turning some heads. And look, he won't always average 21 per half. That's obviously crazy. He shot the ball really well in this game, but he was in attack mode. The 4 assists was really encouraging, so can't really ask for much more than that from Jalen. Last thing on the game side here, before we move on to the rest of the podcast and my final segment on what's going on with ESPN rankings. The Hawks do play again on Thursday. We just don't know what Quinn might do there as far as rotation is concerned. I was told tonight that there was not injuries for the guys who sat. It's Bogey, Reese, Hunter, etc. Maybe those guys play, and the guys who played tonight might sit. Trae usually likes to play in Oklahoma City. He, of course, is from there, so he might play despite the back-to-back, but maybe only a half like tonight. I said it on Monday. I still think Monday is most likely to be the most clear dress rehearsal. That was a pretty normal rotation for 3 quarters, but we'll see how they attack the game on Thursday, because they're going to be getting in very late to Oklahoma City. And as Quinn kind of talked about pregame tonight, even in Miami, they just kind of an odd situation. Like, they would prefer not to have to do this back-to-back. It is good practice in some ways for the season, but you also don't want to stress your guys too much. They will come home after this and have some practice time before the opener on Wednesday, but kind of odd. So there you go. All right, that's all I have on today when it comes to the actual game. They did lose, but again, preseason is not about results necessarily. And nice flashes from certain guys, especially from Trae, Jalen, Dyson, Kobe being better. All that is good stuff. Nothing was disastrous, as long as Capella's injury is not serious. I don't think it is at this point in time. So we'll have more after the game on Thursday. And after a quick break, to from partners on the podcast, we will have some talk about the dreaded ESPN player rankings. But here we go with an ad from our partners. Today's show is brought to you by Hims. And things are important in life, but your schedule is also busy. Maybe you don't have time to go to a doctor's office to be treated for ED directly through Hims. You can get a personalized and convenient ED treatment without stepping foot outside of your own door. Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your own couch. Hims also provides access to a range of doctor-trusted ED treatments like chewable hard mints, as well as Viagra and Cialis and their generics to up to 95% cheaper than they'd be available elsewhere. The process is 100% online, so there's no need to actually be uncomfortable with doctor's visits. Just answer a series of questions on their site, and a medical provider will determine the right treatment option for you. If prescribed, your medication will ship directly to you in discreet packaging for free. No insurance is needed, and one low price covers everything from treatments to ongoing care. With hundreds of thousands of trusted subscribers, Hims can also help you find the ED option that works best for you. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That is HIMS, Hims, HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. One more time, that's hims.com/lockedon. Products mentioned are chewable, compounded products, which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See websites for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Prices vary based on product and subscription plan. All right, so you will have now heard, if you're listening to this podcast, my thoughts on the game on Wednesday. I recorded this, as I said earlier, before I left for this trip on Wednesday. And I will freely admit this, part of my reaction is that I fell into the trap on rankings talk. My old friend Tower Jones, who's been on this podcast before many times, he'll be on the show again in the near future. Hopefully, he hates this segment. So, hi, Tyler. Player rankings are not my favorite thing either. And I intentionally, this entire offseason, I think I did one player ranking mini discussion at some point when a list came out. I used to do a lot more top 100 talk when every list that came out, and they're interesting. I get that. I purposely don't do that a lot anymore just because it is kind of what it is. And these lists are explicitly designed to create reaction in some way. And that is, I would say, doubly true for the folks at ESPN. Number one, because they like to drive their own content. It's a whole machine over there. And how they do it is a little bit different. So I'll say this first. I know a lot of people that work at ESPN. I would call some of them my friends, honestly. I won't name names, but I know a lot of people there. It's not personal or anything like that. But I think the list this year is pretty bad overall. And the Hawks stuff is, I would say, remarkably bad, in my opinion. So I will save my non-Hawks stuff, broadly speaking, on this. But just for some background, the way ESPN does their rankings is they have a panel of voters. And from what they said in their piece, it's comprised of more than 150 reporters, editors, producers, and analysts. And they asked them to rank players based on their predicted contributions for this season only. So that's a massive group of people. I don't think they have that many people on their staff. It's a big operation, of course, that probably know enough and are informed enough to do a list like this. That's a big panel. If we knew who it was, it is what it is. Like, they probably have people that, the full-timers would be a better sample, I would imagine. Anyway, then you have the problem that all of these lists have. And I said this before many times, but young players, intriguing players with upside, generally get to be overranked on these lists because there's always a perception gap, or at least often a perception gap, between where a player is right now and what they might be in a year or in 2 years, and that line gets blurred. So generally, like, lists that include rookies or second-year players, they're often overranking them based on what they're probably going to be that season in that moment versus what they're going to be in the future. So second-year guys, third-year guys, etc. That's an everyone problem. That is not an ESPN problem. That's a list problem, generally speaking, in the NBA world. But that's a long preface to say this on the Hawks stuff, and it's pretty wild, in my opinion. I'll begin by saying this, and this is the meat of this discussion, I will say. Neither Jalen Johnson nor Bogdanovic are in the top 100 for ESPN. One more time. The Hawks have one player in the top 100. It's Trae Young. We'll get to him later. Neither Jalen nor Bogey is on the top 100. Now, that's pretty obviously wrong on both counts. And usually I'm a little bit more measured than I am right now with this conversation, but I think it's that bad where my reaction is fairly strong. And it's interesting because what I just said a minute ago about, like, young players, if anything, tend to be overrated in these lists, in my opinion. Except Jalen Johnson is a very, very intriguing young player with clear upside and production from last year, and he suddenly is not on this list somehow. Kind of baffling. Bogey, in my view, as someone who followed the whole league closely last year, was probably like a top 60 or 70 player in the league last year. And if you want to tell me that he may not repeat that, I would believe you because he played a lot of games last year. I think he was the best reserve in the entire league last year. If you want to say, hey, what are the odds Bogey repeats that? I'm okay listening to that. But even 85% of Bogey would be a top 100 player. And I think he should be on this list very clearly. That's one where it's a little bit strange. Like, he's established. There's not like any projection there with Bogey. He was already that level of player and more a year ago. I think you could reasonably argue that Bogey was their second best player last year, even including DeJounte. But if you didn't want to do that, I get it. But he played a lot more games, and I think cumulative value-wise, he was more valuable than Jalen because he played 20 more games than Jalen did. But either way, Jalen is on the upswing, clearly. And for me, at the very worst, even if you wanted to say, all right, Jalen will be the exact same player he was last year for the Hawks, which for me is a little bit kind of silly, but even if you view it that way, I think Jalen was a top 100 player last year in the NBA. So with no projection, he would still be there. On a per game basis, he averaged what he averaged last year, 17 and 8 on good efficiency, et cetera, et cetera. And by the way, there wasn't like a crippling long-term injury with Jalen last year that cost him that game. He sprained his ankle. He's wearing ankle braces now. It is what it is. Also, while we're here, for more nuance and depth than this on Jalen, I would recommend listening to the show that I did yesterday. It's actually in 2 parts with myself and Glenn Willis talking about Jalen for an hour plus. That was a fun conversation. It's a kind of good timing conversation because of this. So if you want more on Jalen, that's where I would point you to. But suffice to say that I believe leaving him off this list is pretty ridiculous. Then, Bogey's, it is what it is. I don't know. I suspect Hawks fans will be more triggered from what I've seen so far in reactions on social media to Jalen being left off, and I get that. Jalen's more exciting. I get it. But I think it's almost sillier to leave Bogey off in some respects. And by the way, I also did a capsule in 2 parts about Bogey this summer with Glenn. That's still in the feed if you want to listen to about him in a more nuanced way. But long story short, like, I'll talk about Trae in a second too. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful to anybody that I'm about to list that are not on the Hawks that are on this list. But I want to just share some names that are on this list in the top 100. And by proxy, this means that the panel of ESPN's people in total, this is not anybody's individual list. It doesn't mean that one person that I'm thinking of or my friends that I think are smart think this is true. But the overarching panel lists the following players on this list. On a list that, again, does not include Bogey or Jalen. This is not in order. Austin Reeves, apparently better than Bogey and Jalen. Mitchell Robinson, who isn't better than them and is also hurt. Brandon Pajemski, a guy I really like from the Warriors, but was not better than those guys last year. And yes, he'll be a second-year player, but like, what are we doing here? And my two personal favorites, I got to say, and my favorites, I mean favorites in a funny sense, Jonas Valanciunas is on this list. Fine player. Come on. And then with all due respect, and I actually mean this, to a player that is a first ballot Hall of Famer, like unquestionably, the 2024 version of Chris Paul is not better than Bogey and Jalen. It's not even particularly close. And Chris Paul is still an effective player, but like he is in the washed portion of his career. So like, anyway, it's just silly. I'll stop now. And look, I'm not even trying to be a sicko here. Like if I wanted to be a sicko, I would argue, and I probably would argue this, by the way, that like Capella might be a top 100 player still. He's better than Jonas Valanciunas. He's better than Chris Paul in 2024. But I'm not even trying to do that. I'm just saying the top 3 players on the Hawks, one of them's on the list, but number 2 and number 3 in some order, Jalen and Bogey, are very obviously top 100 players, and it's very silly to suggest otherwise. They should be locks. Hawks fans, it was kind of funny yesterday. I kind of pre-teased this. I saw it coming because they released half their list on Tuesday. And it was the 51 through 100. And a couple of Hawks fans were like, wait, surely Bogey and Jalen have to be in the top 50, I guess? Question mark. And I was like, I don't think so, but we'll see. And they weren't. So not there at all. Crazy. I'll be faster on Trae, I promise. But I kind of expect Trae to be underrated now on almost every list. So I'm not surprised as much by this one. He was 37th on the ESPN list. That is considerably too low for Trae. It confirms my thesis overall that he remains pretty clearly underrated at this point. He used to be probably a little bit overrated. Now I think he's very obviously underrated, et cetera, et cetera. For example, he's behind Scotty Barnes. And Scotty Barnes is a good player. He's never been better than Trae at any point. He's behind Jamal Murray. And I know there's a split on Jamal Murray, and look, Jamal Murry's playoff exploit, he's a winner at the playoff. I get all that. Trae has always been better than Jamal Murray. If you want to put Jamal Murray a little higher because of the title, okay. Individual player quality, Trae is clearly better than Jamal Murray. I don't think it's particularly close. And by the way, he looked awful this summer, Jamal Murray. Lauri Markkanen is ahead of Trae, and he doesn't have any of the playoff stuff to augment anything. He's not better than Trae anyway. So anyway, that's the short version. Trae's probably, I guess he'll just be 15, 10 spots too low in every single ranking. I don't understand why, but it is what it is. And just to say this out loud for people that are not Hawks fans or not Trae guys, I'm not arguing that Trae's a top 15 player in the league. I don't think he is at this point, given all of the stuff around him. He's not a perfect player. But he doesn't have to be. Like him being 37th in the league, I think is kind of openly silly. So that's the shorter version. Just to be clear, I was much more bothered and triggered, if you want to use that word, about Bogey and Jalen being left off. That's just silly. It's so very obviously, clearly wrong. Trae, if you want to go eye of the beholder, but there are at least 7, 8, 9 guys that I think are like pretty obviously behind Trae, and another handful that are probably a little bit closer, but we'll stop there. All right. Does this matter? Is the last question. Of course not. It doesn't actually matter. Does it matter in like the internet argument sense? Maybe a little bit. I do think it shows you a little bit of something, especially with regard to Jalen and Bogey, that like, I don't think people have noticed that Bogey in particular last year, like was as good as he was. He's an underrated player. Part of that was that the Hawks weren't that good. I understand that, but they were, as I've said many times, like 10 points per 100 possessions better with Bogey on the court last year. He was not the reason for their struggles. And then Jalen, while Hawks fans have figured out, and I talked about it with Glenn yesterday, and again, that show that you should listen to, Jalen has, I would say, convinced the local fan base that he's good, and that's correct, by the way. I believe he's good as well. he is not quite broken through to the non-sickos. Like the internet sickos, people that like I trust to be watching a lot of basketball, have figured it out with Jalen Johnson. The consensus broader NBA audience has not seen it just yet for Jalen, I don't think. This year they'll see it, I think, but we'll see on that. But anyway, I will stop now on this rant. Again, thank you for your patience listening to the podcast today about the tech stuff, about the game coverage that you would have already heard earlier. I am traveling. Same thing on Thursday, just for the record. I don't know how that podcast will be delivered to you. It might be audio only. We'll see how that all goes as well. It's a day job thing. I don't really have a choice. So it is what it is. So stay tuned for that. Please subscribe to the podcast. And again, we've had wall-to-wall coverage, more to come. Even earlier this week, there was a roundtable that dropped in the feed that I was only a small part of from the Locked On Podcast Network. That's available to listen to right now. We had Glenn on the podcast, Robbie's over-unders, mailbag stuff, wall-to-wall coverage. So please go ahead and subscribe to the podcast. Tell your friends about the show. If you're watching on YouTube, please like this episode and comment on this episode to help us with the algorithm and all of that. And subscribe to the podcast on that platform. Follow the show on Twitter/X at Locked On Hawks. Follow me there at BT Rowland. Follow my non-podcast work at patreon.com/BT Rowland. Thanks for listening, everybody. I really appreciate it. And we'll see you all next time.